25-year-old Jackson Bradley stands in my office doorway, designer suit, pristine MBA diploma practically glowing behind him. "Get your junk out of this office," he smirks, gesturing at my personal items and family photos covering 15 years of dedication. "We're rebranding," he announces like he's revealing some brilliant strategy. My hands shake as I stare at the boxes he's brought for my belongings. This isn't just termination. This is calculated humiliation. But Jackson has no idea what he's just awakened. I still remember the day I first met Gary Morrison. It was October 2008, and the financial crisis had the entire country on edge. I'd just lost my previous marketing job when a furniture store closed, and Gary was this enthusiastic entrepreneur running Morrison Marketing Solutions out of his two-car garage in suburban Phoenix. The company consisted of Gary, his college roommate, handling web design, 4 fresh graduates, and one ancient copy machine that jammed every third page. "We're going to revolutionize how small businesses connect with customers," Gary told me during my interview, his eyes bright with determination. The salary he offered was barely enough to cover rent, but something about his passion convinced me this scrappy startup might actually succeed. Those early days tested everyone's resolve. We worked 16-hour shifts, survived on vending machine coffee, and celebrated every small client victory like we'd won the lottery. When Gary couldn't make payroll in month 3, I made a decision that changed everything. My father had passed away the previous year, leaving me a small commercial property in downtown Phoenix. Instead of selling it immediately, I took out a mortgage against the building to provide Gary with the $50,000 he desperately needed. But that wasn't my only contribution. I'd noticed that Morrison's struggled to land significant contracts because we lacked credibility with established businesses. During my previous job, I developed a relationship with Southwest Regional Bank's marketing director, Linda Walsh. She mentioned they were frustrated with their current agency's generic campaigns that ignored Arizona's unique business culture. I arranged an informal coffee meeting between Linda and Gary. 3 weeks later, Southwest Regional became Morrison Marketing's first major client, signing a 2-year contract worth $300,000. That single relationship saved the company from bankruptcy and established our reputation in the Phoenix business community. Gary was so grateful that he insisted on giving me equity in the company. I declined, preferring the stability of my salary and benefits. Looking back, that decision cost me hundreds of thousands in potential earnings, but I believed in building something meaningful rather than chasing profit. Over the following years, I watched Morrison Marketing transform from that garage startup into a respected agency with 42 employees and offices spanning 3 floors. We specialized in helping local businesses compete against national chains by emphasizing authentic community connections and personalized service approaches that big corporations couldn't replicate. My role evolved naturally from general marketing assistant to director of client relations. I personally managed relationships with 17 major accounts, including healthcare networks, restaurant groups, and professional services firms throughout Arizona and New Mexico. These weren't just business transactions. I knew the family stories behind every business owner, understood their challenges, and crafted marketing strategies that reflected their authentic values. The parking situation developed organically. When Morrisons outgrew Gary's garage and moved to our first real office building, they struggled to find adequate employee parking in downtown Phoenix's congested business district. I owned that small commercial property 3 blocks away, which included a 40-space parking lot that sat mostly empty. Gary mentioned their parking crisis during one of our weekly status meetings. "Use my lot," I offered without hesitation. "Just cover the basic maintenance costs." Gary protested that I should charge market rate, but I refused. Morrison Marketing felt like family, and family helped each other. We shook hands on a simple arrangement. Morrison's employees could park there indefinitely for just the cost of lot maintenance and snow removal. No formal lease agreement, no legal complications. Just trust between people who'd built something beautiful together. For 12 years, that handshake deal worked perfectly. Morrison saved approximately $15,000 annually in parking expenses, while I felt satisfied knowing my property contributed to our collective success. Gary often joked that my parking lot was the company's secret weapon for recruiting talent, since most downtown agencies couldn't offer free employee parking. Everything changed last spring when Gary received an acquisition offer from Pinnacle Corporate Group. I'd heard whispers about Pinnacle's business model. They purchased successful small agencies, stripped away everything that made them unique, and transformed them into cookie-cutter operations, focused solely on profit margins. "Don't worry, Danette," Gary assured me when he announced the sale. "I negotiated protections for all senior employees. Your position is guaranteed for at least 3 years, and they've committed to maintaining our company culture." I wanted to believe him, but Gary's exhausted expression suggested he wasn't entirely convinced either. The medical bills from his wife's cancer treatment had created financial pressures that made Pinnacle's offer impossible to refuse. He needed the money immediately, and waiting for a better buyer wasn't realistic. The sale documents never mentioned my parking arrangement because it seemed irrelevant to the business transaction. Gary assumed the new owners would simply continue our informal agreement, while I trusted that anyone purchasing Morrison Marketing would respect the relationships that made the company successful. We were both completely wrong. Jackson Bradley arrived on a Monday morning in late September, striding through our office like he owned the place, which technically he now did. His charcoal gray suit probably cost more than most of our employees earned in a month, and his Italian leather shoes clicked against our modest tile floors with the rhythm of someone accustomed to making dramatic entrances. "Good morning, everyone," Jackson announced to the bullpen area where our account coordinators worked. "I'm Jackson Bradley, your new Strategic Operations Director. We're going to make some exciting changes around here." His enthusiasm felt forced, like a corporate training video come to life. Behind his practiced smile, I detected something calculating and cold. During the company-wide introduction meeting, Jackson rattled off his credentials with obvious pride: Stanford MBA, 2 years at Goldman Sachs, previous experience, optimizing operational efficiency at 3 other acquired companies. What he didn't mention, but what I discovered through some discreet research, painted a very different picture. Jackson had indeed worked at Goldman Sachs, but only as a summer intern whose father happened to golf with several managing directors. His previous optimization experience involved destroying a family-owned restaurant chain in Oregon by replacing their beloved comfort food menu with trendy fusion dishes that alienated their core customers. Most tellingly, Jackson Bradley wasn't some rising corporate star. He was 25-year-old Richard Bradley Jr., son of Pinnacle's CEO, who'd been handed this position after failing spectacularly at his last 2 jobs. His Stanford MBA couldn't compensate for a complete lack of practical business understanding and an arrogance that made him dangerous in leadership positions. Within his first week, Jackson began implementing changes that revealed his fundamental misunderstanding of what made Morrison Marketing successful. He hired expensive consultants from Los Angeles to evaluate our brand positioning, despite the fact that our local expertise was precisely what clients valued most. These consultants produced a glossy presentation recommending we rebrand as Pinnacle West, eliminating any reference to Gary Morrison or our Arizona roots. "Regional identity is limiting," Jackson explained during a staff meeting. "Our clients need to think bigger, and so do we. Why be a Phoenix marketing company when we could be a Southwest marketing company? Why Southwest when we could be national?" I watched our longtime employees exchange worried glances. Account manager Sarah Thompson, who'd spent 5 years building relationships with Tucson area businesses, raised her hand tentatively. "But Jackson, our clients specifically choose us because we understand their local markets. These restaurant owners don't want national strategies. They want approaches that work in their neighborhoods." Jackson's smile never wavered, but his eyes hardened slightly. "Sarah, I appreciate your perspective, but we need to evolve beyond that limited mindset. Our research shows that businesses prefer working with agencies that think strategically rather than just locally." What research? Jackson had been here 6 days. His research consisted of skimming a few business magazines and applying generic consulting frameworks to our unique market position. The office furniture arrived next. Jackson ordered sleek glass desks, ergonomic chairs, and modern art pieces that transformed our comfortable, welcoming environment into something resembling a trendy startup trying too hard to impress visitors. The warm, family-friendly atmosphere that clients loved disappeared overnight, replaced by sterile corporate aesthetics. "Image matters," Jackson informed anyone who questioned the expenses. "Clients need to see that we're sophisticated professionals, not some small-town operation." But our clients had never seen us as unsophisticated. They appreciated our approachable, down-to-earth culture because it reflected their own values as small business owners who prioritized relationships over flashy presentations. The most troubling change involved Jackson's hiring decisions. He brought in 3 recent MBA graduates from expensive universities, each earning starting salaries higher than what some of our experienced employees made after years of proven success. These new hires lacked any practical marketing experience but spoke fluent corporate buzzwords and seemed to worship Jackson's every pronouncement. 23-year-old Brad Wilson became Jackson's strategic planning coordinator, despite having never worked outside of internships. His primary qualification appeared to be an uncanny ability to nod enthusiastically at everything Jackson said while taking notes on his tablet. 24-year-old Ashley Porter joined as Innovation Specialist, a newly created position that nobody could clearly define, but apparently involved disrupting traditional client engagement paradigms. The third hire, Kevin Martinez, became Process Optimization Manager, with responsibility for streamlining operational inefficiencies. Kevin's first project involved timing how long employees spent on various tasks, clipboard in hand, making everyone feel like they were being evaluated for potential elimination. During these early weeks, I tried giving Jackson the benefit of the doubt. Perhaps his changes would eventually improve our operations, even if they felt jarring initially. Maybe fresh perspectives could enhance our established approaches without destroying what made us special. That optimism died during a conversation I accidentally overheard on a Thursday afternoon in early October. Jackson was meeting with his 3 new hires in the conference room, and the door hadn't closed completely. I was working late updating client files at my desk 30 feet away when fragments of their discussion drifted across the silent office. The biggest obstacle to efficiency is definitely the older workforce, Jackson was saying. These people have been here too long. They're comfortable, resistant to change, and frankly not hungry enough for success. What do you think the average age is here? Ashley asked. Too high, Jackson replied with a laugh. We need fresh energy, people who aren't stuck in old patterns of thinking. The good news is that most of these longtime employees are expensive to maintain. Their salaries and benefits packages are way above current market rates for their skill levels. My hands stopped moving across my keyboard. Were they seriously discussing firing experienced employees who'd built this company's success? So we're looking at a systematic refresh? Brad asked, his voice eager. Exactly. We'll start with performance reviews that identify underperformers. Anyone who can't adapt to our new operational standards becomes a liability. The goal is to reduce average employee age to under 30 within 6 months while cutting payroll costs by at least 20%. Kevin added, My efficiency analysis should provide documentation for any necessary personnel decisions. We just need to ensure everything looks legitimate from a legal perspective. Jackson's response chilled me to the bone. These older workers think their experience makes them valuable, but experience often just means being stuck in outdated methods. We need people who can learn quickly, work flexible hours, and bring contemporary perspectives to client challenges. They weren't discussing performance improvement or skills development. This was a calculated plan to eliminate experienced employees and replace them with cheaper, recent graduates who would be grateful for any opportunity and unlikely to question Jackson's authority. I sat in my darkened office long after their meeting ended, processing the implications. Every longtime employee was apparently at risk. Sarah Thompson, with her deep understanding of Arizona restaurant markets. Frank Torres, who managed our healthcare clients with remarkable expertise. Patricia Wilson, whose financial acumen had saved the company thousands in tax optimization, and dozens of others whose accumulated knowledge formed the foundation of Morrison Marketing's reputation. And clearly I was at the top of their list. The terminations began exactly 2 weeks later, each one executed with surgical precision and corporate speak that barely concealed the underlying brutality. Patricia Wilson was the first to go. Patricia had managed Morrison Marketing's accounting department for 22 years, transforming our financial systems from Gary's shoebox full of receipts into sophisticated tracking and forecasting tools that helped us navigate every economic downturn. She knew every client's payment history, could predict cash flow challenges months in advance, and had personally saved the company tens of thousands of dollars through her meticulous attention to tax regulations and expense optimization. On Friday afternoon, November 3rd, Jackson called Patricia into the main conference room for what she assumed was a routine budget review. Instead, she found Jackson flanked by two people she'd never seen before, a stone-faced woman from Pinnacle's Human Resources Department and a man introduced as a transition specialist. "Patricia, we appreciate your years of service," Jackson began with practiced sympathy. "But we've decided to restructure our accounting operations to better align with Pinnacle's integrated financial systems. Today will be your last day with the company." Patricia later told me she felt like she'd been punched in the stomach. "Restructure, Jackson. I've been modernizing our accounting systems for 2 decades. I know every aspect of this company's financial history." "What restructuring?" The HR woman slid a folder across the table. "We're transitioning to automated bookkeeping software that will handle most accounting functions. Your position has become redundant. You'll receive 2 weeks of severance pay, and your health insurance will continue through the end of the month." 2 weeks of severance. After 22 years of dedicated service, Patricia received exactly the minimum amount required by Arizona state law. No consideration for her accumulated knowledge, her institutional memory, or her role in building the financial foundation that made Morrison Marketing attractive to buyers like Pinnacle. Patricia cleaned out her desk while the rest of us watched in stunned silence. Jackson had scheduled her termination for late Friday afternoon, ensuring most employees would be focused on weekend plans rather than processing what had just happened. By Monday morning, a 24-year-old recent graduate named Tyler Brooks occupied Patricia's office armed with cloud-based accounting software and unlimited confidence in his ability to master decades of accumulated expertise in a few weeks. Tyler immediately began correcting Patricia's systems, convinced that newer meant better. Within 10 days, he'd created a billing error that nearly cost us our contract with Desert Regional Medical Center, one of our most valuable accounts. The error stemmed from his failure to understand a complex payment structure that Patricia had negotiated 3 years earlier to accommodate the medical center's unique budgeting requirements. I spent hours on the phone with Desert Regional's CFO, explaining the mistake and assuring him it wouldn't happen again. Privately, I wondered how many similar disasters Tyler would create before Jackson acknowledged that experience actually mattered. Frank Torres fell next 3 weeks later. Frank had supervised our customer service operations for 18 years, developing response protocols and client communication strategies that consistently earned Morrison Marketing the highest client satisfaction ratings in the Phoenix market. His team handled everything from minor billing questions to major campaign crises, and Frank's personal touch had salvaged countless client relationships that might otherwise have been lost to misunderstandings or service failures. Jackson called Frank's elimination operational streamlining. Rather than terminating him directly, they restructured his department into 3 separate functions: customer success management, service quality assurance, and client communication coordination. Frank's job was divided among Tyler Brooks and 2 of Jackson's recent MBA hires, none of whom had ever actually managed customer relationships or resolved service complaints. "We're implementing a more systematic approach to customer relations," Jackson announced during the staff meeting where he revealed Frank's departure. "Instead of relying on individual expertise, we'll use standardized processes and documented procedures to ensure consistent service quality." Frank's standardized processes had been working beautifully for nearly 2 decades. His individual expertise consisted of knowing every major client's preferences, communication styles, and business challenges well enough to resolve problems before they became crises. Replacing him with inexperienced graduates following checklists was like replacing a master chef with a cookbook and hoping for the same results. The consequences became apparent within days. Client complaints increased dramatically as the new team struggled to understand long-standing relationships and established protocols. Ashley Porter, now handling client communication coordination, sent a cheerfully generic email to all our restaurant clients promoting our exciting new social media strategies for the hospitality industry. She had no idea that several of those restaurants specifically avoided social media marketing due to previous bad experiences with online review manipulation. 3 restaurant owners called me personally to ask if Morrison Marketing was experiencing internal problems. They could sense something had changed in our service quality and communication tone, and they weren't happy about it. But the most devastating termination came in early December when Jackson eliminated Janet Rodriguez, our senior creative director. Janet had been with Morrison Marketing for 16 years, developing the visual identity and messaging strategies that defined our brand and attracted clients throughout the Southwest. Her portfolio included award-winning campaigns for major healthcare systems, successful restaurant chains, and professional service firms whose revenues had grown exponentially under her creative guidance. Jackson's justification for eliminating Janet was creative modernization. He claimed that client demands were shifting toward contemporary digital aesthetics that required fresh creative perspectives unbound by traditional approaches. In reality, Jackson wanted to replace Janet with a creative agency in Los Angeles that Pinnacle used for all their acquired companies. This agency specialized in template-based designs that could be quickly customized for different businesses, eliminating the need for truly original creative work. Their aesthetic was sleek and modern, but utterly generic, stripped of any local character or authentic connection to client values. Janet's termination meeting was particularly cruel. Jackson praised her historical contributions, while explaining that the company needed to evolve beyond regional creative limitations. He suggested that her traditional design sensibilities were holding back the company's potential to compete in national markets. Traditional? Janet asked with obvious hurt. Jackson, our healthcare campaigns won 3 regional awards this year. Our restaurant clients have seen average revenue increases of 30%. What exactly is traditional about success? Jackson's response revealed the depth of his arrogance. Janet, I understand this is difficult, but we need creative leadership that thinks bigger than regional markets. Our clients deserve cutting-edge strategies, not approaches that might have worked 5 years ago. 5 years ago, Janet had created our most successful campaigns within the past 18 months. Her traditional approaches were consistently delivering results that exceeded client expectations and industry benchmarks. Jackson was eliminating demonstrated excellence in favor of theoretical innovation that existed only in his imagination. As I watched these talented, experienced professionals pack their personal belongings and say goodbye to careers they'd spent decades building, I began documenting everything. I kept copies of performance reviews, client feedback, and financial results that proved these terminations had nothing to do with inadequate performance and everything to do with Jackson's desire to remake Morrison Marketing in his own image. I also started paying closer attention to the conversations I could overhear from Jackson's office. His casual discussions with Brad Wilson and Ashley Porter revealed the true scope of his plans. They weren't just eliminating a few older employees. They were systematically dismantling the institutional knowledge and client relationships that made Morrison Marketing valuable, replacing them with generic corporate processes that could be implemented anywhere. Most chilling was a comment Jackson made during a phone call with his father in mid-December. I was working late again, and Jackson apparently assumed the office was empty when he took the call on speakerphone. Dad, the transition is going exactly as planned, Jackson reported. We've reduced payroll by 18% so far, and productivity metrics are actually improving as we eliminate inefficient legacy processes. Richard Bradley's voice crackled through the phone. Good work, son. What about the remaining older employees? Most will be gone by March. I'm building documentation to justify each termination so we won't face any legal challenges. The key is making everything look performance-based rather than age-related. And the client relationships, Jackson laughed. That's the beauty of our model, Dad. Once we standardize all the processes and transition accounts to our centralized management systems, individual relationships become irrelevant. Clients will get better service from our systematic approach than they ever got from these informal, personality-driven connections. I felt sick listening to Jackson describe the destruction of everything we'd built as better service. He genuinely believed that eliminating personal relationships and replacing them with corporate efficiency would improve client satisfaction, despite mounting evidence that our service quality was deteriorating rapidly. But Jackson's next comment made me realize that my own termination was imminent. The biggest remaining obstacle is probably Danette Mason. She's got too much influence with major clients and she's been here too long. Her salary alone could fund 2 recent graduates, and frankly, her attitude toward our changes has been pretty negative. Negative attitude. I'd been professional and cooperative despite watching Jackson destroy everything I'd helped build. If expressing concern about declining client satisfaction constituted a negative attitude, then I was guilty as charged. Richard Bradley asked, "Can you document performance issues?" "Already working on it. We've got client feedback suggesting she's resistant to innovative approaches, and her project timelines have been inconsistent with our new efficiency standards. I'll have a solid case by January." Client feedback suggesting resistance to innovation. Project timelines inconsistent with efficiency standards. Jackson was fabricating a performance case against me using twisted interpretations of normal business interactions and impossible expectations that he'd never clearly communicated. I realized then that I wasn't just witnessing the destruction of Morrison Marketing. I was next on Jackson's elimination list, and he was already building the lies he'd use to justify my termination without severance pay. January 15th arrived with an unusual winter chill for Phoenix, and I should have recognized it as an omen. Jackson had requested a meeting with me for 10:30 that morning, scheduling it in the main conference room rather than his office. The formal setting immediately put me on alert, especially since he'd asked me to bring any personal items from your workspace. I spent the weekend preparing for this moment, knowing it would likely be my last day at Morrison Marketing. Over the previous month, I'd watched Jackson's documentation campaign against me intensify. He'd begun questioning my decisions in writing, creating email trails that portrayed reasonable business discussions as evidence of insubordination or poor judgment. When I walked into that conference room, I found Jackson seated at the head of the polished oak table, flanked by the same human resources representative who'd terminated Patricia and Frank. A stack of file folders sat in front of him, along with 2 cardboard boxes that made his intentions crystal clear. "Danette, please sit down," Jackson began with false sympathy. "I'm afraid we need to discuss some concerns about your performance and fit within our evolving organizational culture." I took the chair across from him, maintaining eye contact despite the pit growing in my stomach. "What concerns Jackson?" He opened the top folder and consulted his notes with theatrical precision. "Over the past 4 months, we've observed several troubling patterns. Multiple clients have expressed frustration with your resistance to implementing our new strategic frameworks. Your project completion times have fallen below our efficiency standards. And frankly, your attitude toward necessary organizational changes has been consistently negative." Every word was carefully calculated to create a false narrative. Client frustration. I'd spent countless hours managing client relationships as Jackson's changes created confusion and service disruptions. Efficiency standards. He'd never communicated any specific standards, just imposed arbitrary deadlines that ignored the complexity of long-term client relationships. Negative attitude. I'd been diplomatic and professional while watching him destroy decades of accumulated trust and expertise. Jackson, which clients specifically expressed these concerns, I'd like to understand their feedback so I can address any issues. His smile was practiced and cold. "I'm not going to get into specific details, Danette. The feedback has been consistent enough that we need to make a change. Additionally, your methods and client management approaches feel outdated for our current strategic direction." Outdated methods I'd maintained and grown our most valuable client relationships, while Jackson's modern approaches alienated longtime partners and confused potential new customers. Southwest Regional Bank had renewed their contract 3 months early, specifically because they valued the personal attention and strategic understanding I provided. Westfield Industries had increased their annual spending by 40% after I developed a targeted campaign that perfectly matched their expansion goals. "I think there's been a misunderstanding," I said carefully. "My client retention rates are above 95%, and their satisfaction scores consistently exceed our benchmarks. If specific clients have concerns, I'd appreciate the opportunity to address them directly." Jackson waved dismissively. "Danette, I understand this is difficult, but dwelling on past metrics isn't helpful. We're focused on future performance potential, and honestly, your skill set isn't aligned with where we're taking this company." The human resources representative slid a folder across the table toward me. "Ms. Mason, we're terminating your employment effective immediately. You'll find your final paycheck calculation and benefits information in this packet." I opened the folder and immediately understood the final insult. No severance pay. After 15 years of dedicated service, Jackson was claiming performance-related termination to avoid paying anything beyond my accrued vacation time. The total amount, $2,300, representing 10 unused vacation days at my daily salary rate. "This is my notice period," I asked, pointing to the measly sum. "Unfortunately, performance-related terminations don't qualify for severance packages," the HR representative explained with practiced neutrality. "However, your health insurance will continue through the end of January. 8 more days of health coverage." Jackson was eliminating my income, my benefits, and my professional reputation, all in one efficient meeting. But Jackson wasn't finished. He gestured toward my family photos, small plants and personal decorations that had made my office feel welcoming for 15 years. "Your junk doesn't belong in a modern office anyway," he said with casual cruelty. "We're rebranding and you're not part of that brand. Junk." He called my personal mementos junk. The photo of my father and me at my college graduation, the small cactus I'd grown from, a cutting my mother brought from her garden, the thank you cards from clients whose businesses had thrived with our help. Jackson saw these tangible connections to my life and relationships as worthless clutter. "We need you to pack everything today," he continued. "Security will escort you out once you're finished." Security escort. After 15 years of arriving early, staying late, and treating Morrison Marketing like my second home, I was being marched out like a criminal. As Jackson stood to leave, apparently considering our meeting concluded, he delivered his final blow. "Oh, and Danette, we have some exciting news to share. We just secured a major contract renewal with Westfield Industries. My fresh approach really resonated with their leadership team. It's exactly the kind of forward-thinking strategy that sets us apart from outdated relationship-based methods." I stared at him in disbelief. Westfield Industries was my account. I'd nurtured that relationship for 8 years, understanding Thomas Chen's business philosophy, his company's unique market challenges, and his expansion goals well enough to craft strategies that delivered exceptional results. Thomas had called me personally just 2 weeks ago to express concerns about Morrison Marketing's recent changes and to thank me for maintaining consistency during what he called a period of organizational uncertainty. Jackson had no idea that Thomas Chen valued personal relationships above slick presentations, that Westfield's success stemmed from authentic community connections rather than generic corporate strategies. Jackson was taking credit for a contract renewal that existed entirely because of my long-term relationship building and despite his disruptive changes. "Jackson," I said slowly, "Thomas Chen specifically requested that I remain his primary contact. He's been concerned about maintaining continuity during your transition." Jackson's smile became genuinely smug. "Danette, I appreciate that you think personal relationships matter, but clients respond to competence and innovation. Thomas was impressed by our systematic approach to his industry challenges. He doesn't need hand-holding anymore." Hand-holding. Jackson characterized 8 years of strategic partnership market analysis and customized solutions as hand-holding. He genuinely believed that his textbook approaches could replace the deep understanding I'd developed of Westfield's business culture, competitive landscape, and growth objectives. "The boxes are for your personal items," Jackson added, pointing to the cardboard containers. "Please have everything packed within the hour." I looked around the conference room where I'd presented countless client campaigns, celebrated team successes, and worked through challenging problems with colleagues who'd become like family. Jackson was erasing 15 years of my professional life in less time than it took him to drink his morning coffee. But as I started toward my office to begin packing, something shifted inside me. Jackson's arrogance had finally revealed the depth of his ignorance. He thought he controlled everything at Morrison Marketing, but he'd made one crucial oversight. In his eagerness to eliminate me and claim credit for my work, he'd forgotten to ask a very important question: who actually owned the foundation on which his entire operation depended? I walked slowly back to my office, outwardly complying with Jackson's demand, while my mind raced through possibilities. Jackson stood in the conference room doorway, clearly enjoying his moment of triumph, as he watched me begin the humiliating process of packing my career into cardboard boxes. I started with the items on my desk, carefully wrapping my father's photograph and placing it in the first box. As I reached for my small address book, my fingers brushed against my phone, and suddenly I remembered something that Jackson had obviously never considered. For the past 12 years, Morrison Marketing Solutions had operated under an informal arrangement that saved them thousands of dollars annually while providing their employees with convenient, secure parking. That arrangement existed solely because of my personal generosity and my trust in Gary Morrison's character. Gary had never formalized the lease agreement because it felt unnecessary between friends who'd built something meaningful together. But Gary Morrison no longer controlled the company. Jackson Bradley did. And Jackson had just demonstrated exactly how much respect he had for informal agreements, personal relationships, and the people who'd made Morrison Marketing successful. I pulled out my phone with newfound calmness. "I need to make one quick call," I announced to the conference room. Jackson glanced up from his own phone, where he appeared to be texting someone about his successful termination meeting. "Fine, but make it fast. Security is expecting you to be out of the building within the hour." I scrolled through my contacts until I found the number for James Sullivan, the attorney who'd managed my family's property portfolio since my father's death. Jim had handled the estate planning, property taxes, and lease agreements for my small but valuable collection of downtown Phoenix real estate. "Jim, it's Danette," I said when he answered. "I need to discuss the parking and office space lease with Morrison Marketing." "Oh, the informal arrangement your dad set up. Sure, what's going on?" I kept my voice steady and professional, making sure Jackson could hear every word clearly. "The company has been sold to new ownership, and they've decided to terminate my employment. Given the changed circumstances, I think it's time to formalize our property agreements or end them entirely." Jackson's head snapped up from his phone. For the first time since I'd known him, his confident expression showed a flicker of uncertainty. "Danette, you own the parking lot?" Jim asked with surprise. "I thought you just worked there." "I work here, and I also own the property where everyone parks their cars and where the company leases their ground floor office space. My father purchased the building in 1995, and I inherited it when he passed. For the past 12 years, I've been providing the parking and office space to Morrison Marketing at well below market rate as a personal favor to the founder." Jackson stood up slowly, his phone forgotten. I could see him processing the implications, his face growing pale as he realized the magnitude of his oversight. "So what do you want to do?" Jim asked. "Formalize a lease agreement with the new owners." I looked directly at Jackson as I responded. "Actually, I want to revoke the arrangement entirely, effective immediately. The new management has made it clear that they don't value the personal relationships and informal agreements that made this company successful. They prefer systematic, contractual approaches to business relationships." "Revoke it." Jim's voice sharpened with lawyer instincts. "Danette, are you sure that's going to create some immediate complications for them?" "I'm completely sure. The parking lease ends now. All vehicles need to be removed within 30 minutes, or they'll be towed as unauthorized cars on private property. The office space lease terminates at the end of this week. After Friday, they'll need to find alternative accommodations." Jackson pushed back from the conference table and walked quickly toward me. "Danette, wait. You own this parking lot." I covered the phone's speaker. "Yes, Jackson. The parking lot where your Lexus is currently parked along with every other employee's car. Also the office space where your rebranding consultants have been working. My family's property leased informally to Morrison Marketing as a favor to Gary Morrison." "But that's—" Jackson stammered, his corporate confidence evaporating. "The lease documents, the property rights, should have been included in our acquisition." "There are no lease documents, Jackson. It was a handshake agreement between friends. Since you've made clear that you don't value those kinds of relationships, I'm ending it." I returned to my phone conversation. "Jim, how quickly can you arrange for towing services?" "I can call Rodriguez Towing right now. Mike's been handling unauthorized vehicles at your properties for years. He can be there in 15 minutes. "Perfect. Please have him remove all cars from the parking lot immediately. The property owners are revoking parking privileges for current occupants." Jackson's face had gone from pale to ashen. He was frantically calculating the implications, not just his own car being towed, but every employee's vehicle, the disruption to operations, the immediate crisis of having no legal place to park or even work beyond this week. "And the office space," Jim continued. "What's your timeline for lease termination?" "End of business Friday. They can finish out this week, but after that, they'll need to vacate the premises." "Danette, that's pretty aggressive. Are you sure you want to move this quickly?" I thought about Patricia Wilson's 22 years of dedicated service, rewarded with 2 weeks of severance, about Frank Torres and Janet Rodriguez, eliminated and humiliated for the crime of being experienced, about Jackson calling my cherished personal items junk and treating me like a criminal for having the audacity to build something meaningful. "I'm absolutely sure, Jim. Please proceed immediately." Jackson was now standing directly beside my desk, his expensive suit no protection against the growing panic in his eyes. "Danette, surely we can work something out. Maybe I was hasty about your termination. We could discuss alternative arrangements. I hung up the phone and looked at him calmly. Jackson, you were very clear about my status here. I'm terminated effective immediately for performance issues. My methods are outdated, my attitude is negative, and my skills aren't aligned with your strategic direction. Why would you want to work something out with someone so problematic? I may have been too harsh. Your experience does have value, and perhaps we moved too quickly with organizational changes. Too quickly. Jackson had spent 4 months systematically destroying everything that made Morrison Marketing successful, and now that he faced consequences for his arrogance, he suddenly discovered the value of experience and relationships. Jackson, you said my personal items were junk that didn't belong in your modern office. You said clients respond to competence and innovation, not hand-holding relationships. You were absolutely right. So let's stick with your systematic contractual approach to business. Through the office windows, I could see a large tow truck turning into the parking lot. Mike Rodriguez had arrived exactly on time, just as Jim had promised. Jackson followed my gaze and saw the truck positioning itself near a cluster of cars. That's Mike Rodriguez from Rodriguez Towing. He's been handling property management for my family's real estate portfolio for years. Very reliable, very efficient. Jackson's phone buzzed with a text message, and his face went even paler as he read it. Someone's asking about the tow truck in the parking lot. Mike works quickly. Your employees should probably move their cars immediately if they don't want them impounded. Jackson stared at me with something approaching desperation. Dennett, this is going to create massive disruption. We have client meetings this afternoon. People won't understand what's happening. I continued packing my father's photograph into the cardboard box. You're absolutely right, Jackson. Sudden changes can be very disruptive, kind of like terminating experienced employees without notice or eliminating departments that have been working successfully for years. But I'm sure your systematic approaches and process optimization will handle any temporary complications. Through the window, I watched Mike Rodriguez attach chains to Jackson's pristine silver Lexus. The car that represented Jackson's success and status was about to become a symbol of his spectacular failure to understand the business he thought he controlled. The sound of chains rattling against metal echoed across the parking lot as Mike Rodriguez efficiently secured Jackson's Lexus to his tow truck. I watched through my office window as Jackson ran outside his expensive Italian shoes, slipping slightly on the concrete as he rushed toward his car. "What are you doing?" Jackson screamed, his composed corporate demeanor completely shattered. "That's my car! You can't just take it!" Mike barely glanced up from his work. At 62 years old, he'd been in the towing business for over 30 years and had dealt with every imaginable variation of outraged car owners. Nothing Jackson could say or do would surprise him. "Property owner revoked your parking lease," Mike replied calmly, continuing his methodical process of securing the vehicle. "All unauthorized cars get removed. You want your car back, you talk to the impound lot." Jackson spun around, scanning the parking lot until he spotted me watching from my office window. He pointed directly at me, his face flushed with rage and desperation. "She did this. She's the one you need to talk to." Mike looked toward my office, saw me wave acknowledgement, and shrugged. "Lady owns the property. Lady says cars gotta go. Cars go." Other employees had noticed the commotion and were beginning to gather around their own vehicles, unsure whether they should attempt to move them or simply watch the drama unfold. Ashley Porter stood beside her compact Honda, looking confused and slightly terrified. Brad Wilson fumbled with his keys, apparently trying to decide whether to risk driving away or stay to support his boss. Jackson pulled out his phone and dialed frantically. Within seconds, his father's voice echoed across the parking lot as Jackson answered on speakerphone, apparently too panicked to consider privacy. "Dad, we have a major problem," Jackson said breathlessly. "The woman I just terminated owns the parking lot. She's having all our cars towed." Richard Bradley's response was immediate and explosive. "She owns the what? How the hell do we not know who owns our parking facilities?" It wasn't in any of the acquisition documents. Gary Morrison never mentioned it. I guess it was some informal arrangement that wasn't legally documented. Jesus Christ, Jackson, what do you mean, informal arrangement? I could hear the fury building in Richard Bradley's voice, even from 50 feet away. Jackson's speakerphone conversation was broadcasting his humiliation to every employee within earshot. "She says her family owns the building and the parking lot, and she's been letting Morrison Marketing use it as a favor for the past 12 years. Now she's ending the arrangement. Ending it? Can she do that legally? I don't know. She says there's no lease agreement, just a handshake deal with Gary. Her attorney is handling the towing. Richard Bradley's voice dropped to a dangerously quiet tone. Jackson, are you telling me that our entire Phoenix operation depends on an informal agreement with an employee you just fired? I didn't know she owned the property. How was I supposed to know that? By doing basic due diligence, by understanding the business assets before making major personnel decisions, by not firing people who might have leverage over our operations. The conversation was devastating to Jackson's authority. Every employee could hear his father's assessment of the situation. Jackson had made a catastrophic error by failing to understand the basic infrastructure of the business he was supposedly managing. Mike Rodriguez had finished securing the Lexus and was now walking toward Ashley's Honda. Ma'am, you need to move your car or it gets towed too. Ashley looked frantically toward Jackson, who was still arguing with his father on speakerphone. Jackson, what should I do? Jackson covered his phone momentarily. I don't know. Just get your car out of here for now. As Ashley scrambled to start her Honda and drive away, Jackson returned to his phone call. Dad, it gets worse. She also says the office space lease is terminated. We have until Friday to find new accommodations. The silence on Richard Bradley's end lasted long enough that I wondered if the call had dropped. When he finally spoke again, his voice carried the weight of complete professional disappointment. Jackson, let me understand this completely. You fired the woman who owns the building where we operate and the parking lot where we keep our cars. You did this without knowing she owned these properties. And now our entire Phoenix operation is homeless. It's not homeless. We just need to find alternative arrangements. In 3 days, Jackson, do you have any idea how long commercial lease negotiations take, or what short-term office rentals cost in downtown Phoenix, or where 30 employees are supposed to park while you figure this out? Jackson's confidence was crumbling in real time. Dad, we can work through this. Maybe we can negotiate with her. Negotiate with her. You just fired her and called her personal belongings junk. What exactly do you think she owes us? Mike Rodriguez had finished towing Jackson's Lexus and was returning for another vehicle. The parking lot was beginning to empty as employees realized they needed to move their cars immediately or face towing fees and impound lot hassles. Inside the building, I could see Kevin Martinez frantically calling someone, probably trying to find emergency office space for Pinnacle's Phoenix operations. Tyler Brooks was staring at his computer screen with obvious panic, likely realizing that losing the office meant losing access to all the accounting systems and client files he'd been struggling to manage since Patricia's departure. But the most satisfying moment came when my phone rang. The caller ID showed Thomas Chen from Westfield Industries. Danette, I'm calling because I heard some concerning rumors about changes at Morrison Marketing. Are you still my primary contact there? I glanced toward Jackson, who was now pleading with his father while watching Mike Rodriguez chain up another employee's car. Actually, Thomas, I'm no longer with Morrison Marketing as of today. I was terminated this morning. Terminated? But Danette, you've been managing our account brilliantly for years. What happened? New ownership decided to streamline operations by eliminating experienced employees and implementing more systematic approaches to client relationships. Thomas's tone sharpened immediately. Systematic approaches, Danette. We specifically value the personal attention and industry understanding you've provided. We're not interested in generic corporate strategies. I understand completely, Thomas. That's exactly why they felt my approach wasn't aligned with their strategic direction. Well, their strategic direction isn't aligned with our needs. Can we discuss transitioning our contract to whatever company you're joining next? I smiled, watching Jackson pace frantically around the increasingly empty parking lot. I'm actually considering starting my own consultancy. Would Westfield be interested in being a founding client? Absolutely. Can we set up a meeting this week to discuss terms? Jackson had apparently overheard enough of my phone conversation to understand what was happening. He stopped pacing and stared at me through the office window, his face a mixture of rage and dawning comprehension. Thomas, I'd be delighted to meet with you. How about Thursday afternoon? Perfect. And Danette, I'm glad you're moving on. We were growing concerned about Morrison Marketing's direction anyway. After I hung up, Jackson marched back into the office, his expensive suit now wrinkled and his confidence entirely shattered. You can't steal our clients. I'm not stealing anything, Jackson. Thomas called me to discuss concerns about Morrison Marketing's new direction. I simply explained that I was no longer available to address those concerns as your employee. That's corporate sabotage. Actually, Jackson, that's exactly the kind of relationship-based business you criticized as outdated hand-holding. Thomas Chen values personal connections and industry expertise. Your systematic approaches apparently don't provide what he's looking for. Jackson's phone buzzed again, and his face went pale as he read the message. Another client wants to know about account transitions. Who? Southwest Regional Bank. They're asking if you'll still be managing their relationship. Southwest Regional Bank. My very first major client relationship, the one that had saved Morrison Marketing from bankruptcy 15 years ago. Linda Walsh had retired, but her successor valued continuity and trusted my understanding of their unique marketing challenges. What are you going to tell them? I asked. Jackson stared at me with something approaching desperation. What do you want, Danette Money, a consulting contract partnership in the company? I continued packing my personal items into the cardboard boxes Jackson had provided. Jackson, I want exactly what you've given me. Freedom from an organization that doesn't value experience relationships or the people who built its success. You've actually done me a tremendous favor. Through the window, I could see Mike Rodriguez hooking up the last unauthorized vehicle in the parking lot. The Morrison marketing team was now completely carless, stranded in an office building they'd lose access to in 3 days, with no legal place to park, even if they found temporary transportation. Jackson made one final attempt at negotiation. Danette, I admit I made mistakes, but destroying the company won't help anyone. Think about all the other employees who'll lose their jobs if we can't continue operations. I looked at him thoughtfully. You're absolutely right, Jackson. Destroying established business relationships doesn't help anyone. Eliminating experienced employees creates serious operational risks. Ignoring the personal connections that make companies successful can lead to catastrophic consequences. Exactly. So maybe we can find a solution that works for everyone. We already found that solution, Jackson. You systematically identified and eliminated every inefficiency in your operation. You streamlined personnel costs by replacing expensive experienced workers with affordable recent graduates. You modernized client relationships by removing the hand-holding and personal attention that was holding the company back. You've achieved exactly what you wanted. Jackson's shoulders sagged as he realized that his own words and actions had created the situation he now faced. Every justification he'd used for eliminating experienced employees was being applied back to him with perfect logical consistency. The only remaining inefficiency, I added, is my informal relationship-based approach to property management. But don't worry, I'm sure you'll find systematic solutions to your office space and parking challenges. After all, competence and innovation always triumph over personal relationships. 6 weeks later, I sat in my new office on the 3rd floor of the same building where Morrison Marketing had once thrived. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was now both landlord and tenant, charging myself fair market rent for space that I used to provide to others as a gesture of friendship and trust. The morning sun streamed through windows that overlooked the parking lot where Jackson's Lexus had been towed, and I couldn't help but smile as I reviewed the financial projections for Mason Strategic Consulting. My new company had launched with 3 major clients, Westfield Industries Southwest Regional Bank and Desert Regional Medical Center. All 3 had terminated their contracts with Morrison Marketing within 2 weeks of my departure. The destruction of Morrison Marketing had been swift and comprehensive. Unable to find suitable office space on short notice, Jackson had been forced to accept a month-to-month lease in a converted warehouse facility 20 miles from downtown Phoenix. The commute doubled most employees' travel time, and the lack of nearby parking added another layer of daily frustration. More devastating was the client exodus. Thomas Chen hadn't been the only one concerned about Morrison's new direction. When experienced employees like Patricia, Frank, Janet, and myself were eliminated, our clients noticed immediately. The personal relationships and institutional knowledge that Jackson dismissed as outdated hand-holding had been the foundation of every major account's loyalty. Within 30 days, Morrison Marketing lost 60% of their revenue as clients, either followed departing employees or simply terminated their contracts rather than work with inexperienced replacements who didn't understand their businesses or their needs. Jackson's systematic approaches and process optimization proved completely inadequate for managing the complex relationship-based work that had made Morrison Marketing successful. Tyler Brooks couldn't replicate Patricia's financial expertise. Ashley Porter and Brad Wilson couldn't maintain the client relationships that Frank Torres had nurtured for years. The creative agency from Los Angeles produced generic campaigns that looked professionally polished but failed to connect with local markets and authentic brand values. The final blow came when Gary Morrison called me in late February with an unexpected proposition. "Danette, I owe you an enormous apology," Gary began when we met for coffee at our old cafe near the original Morrison marketing office. I was so focused on solving my immediate financial problems that I ignored what the sale would mean for people like you who'd invested their careers in building something meaningful. Gary looked older than I remembered, worn down by guilt and regret. His wife's medical bills had been resolved, but the cost of solving that crisis had been the destruction of everything he'd spent decades creating. "Pinnacle is shutting down the Phoenix operation entirely," he continued. "Richard Bradley fired Jackson last week after the client losses made the acquisition worthless. They're writing off the whole investment as a failed expansion attempt." I felt a mixture of satisfaction and sadness. Jackson's arrogance had finally caught up with him, but his failure had also destroyed the livelihoods of innocent employees who'd simply been caught in his misguided restructuring efforts. "What about the remaining staff?" I asked. "Most have already found other jobs. A few approached me about starting something new together." Gary paused, clearly building up to the real purpose of our meeting. "Actually, that's what I wanted to discuss with you. What would you think about rebuilding Morrison marketing the right way this time?" The proposal was tempting. Gary had learned painful lessons about the value of personal relationships and experienced employees. He understood now that success came from nurturing talent and building trust rather than chasing quick profits through cost-cutting and corporate efficiency schemes. But I'd also learned important lessons during those devastating months, watching Jackson destroy everything we'd built. The most crucial realization was that I'd spent 15 years building other people's dreams while sitting on assets and relationships that gave me real independence and control over my professional destiny. "Gary, I appreciate the offer and I respect what you're trying to do," I replied carefully. "But I think I need to continue building something that I control completely. I've discovered that having my own foundation makes me stronger and more valuable to the clients I serve." Gary nodded with obvious disappointment, but also understanding. "I can't argue with that logic. You've certainly proven that you can succeed on your own terms." The success of Mason's strategic consulting had exceeded my most optimistic expectations. Operating from property I owned with overhead costs, I controlled completely. I could focus entirely on delivering exceptional value to clients rather than managing internal politics or corporate restructuring schemes. More importantly, I'd learned to value my own expertise and relationships as the valuable assets they actually were. For 15 years, I'd undervalued my contributions while watching other people take credit for work I'd made possible. Never again would I allow someone else to define my worth or treat my experience as disposable. The lesson that emerged from this painful experience became the foundation of how I approached every business relationship going forward. Respect and trust must be mutual, or they don't exist at all. Jackson had assumed that he could eliminate me without consequences because he fundamentally misunderstood the nature of the business he was trying to control. Business isn't just about processes and systems and efficiency metrics. Real success comes from understanding that behind every contract and client relationship are human beings making decisions based on trust, competence, and mutual respect. When you treat people as disposable resources rather than valuable partners, you discover very quickly how much power they actually held all along. The morning I'd packed my personal items into Jackson's cardboard boxes, I'd felt humiliated and powerless. But that humiliation had forced me to recognize strengths and assets I'd been taking for granted. Sometimes the best thing that can happen to you is having someone underestimate you so completely that you're forced to prove them wrong. 3 months later, I hired Sarah Thompson as my director of regional accounts. She'd found temporary work after Jackson eliminated her position, but she jumped at the chance to rebuild the client relationships she'd spent years developing. Patricia Wilson became my chief financial officer, bringing the expertise and institutional knowledge that Tyler Brooks had never managed to acquire. Even Frank Torres joined the team as client experience director, creating the systematic approaches to customer service that Jackson had claimed to want but never actually understood how to implement. We weren't trying to recreate Morrison marketing. We were building something better, a company that recognized experience as an asset rather than a liability, that valued relationships over corporate efficiency schemes, and that understood the difference between systematic approaches and systemic destruction. The final vindication came when Jackson's replacement at Morrison Marketing contacted me about subleasing office space. Pinnacle Corporate Group was attempting to salvage something from their Phoenix investment by running a scaled-down operation focused on small local clients rather than the major accounts they'd lost. "We're looking for cost-effective alternatives to our current facility," the new manager explained during our phone conversation. "Your building has an excellent location and competitive rates." I considered the request seriously. Business is business, and my property generated revenue regardless of who occupied the space. But I also remembered Jackson's dismissive comment about my junk not belonging in a modern office, and his assumption that systematic approaches would always triumph over personal relationships. "I appreciate your interest," I replied politely, "but I don't think our space is aligned with your strategic direction. You might be better served by one of the modern corporate facilities that specialize in efficiency optimization." The irony was perfect. Jackson had taught me the language of corporate rejection, and I was using it to decline a request from the company he'd briefly controlled before destroying it completely. As I finished reviewing my quarterly financial reports that sunny Phoenix morning, I realized that the most important lesson from my experience with Jackson Bradley wasn't about business strategy or client relationships or property ownership. It was about recognizing your own value and refusing to accept treatment that diminishes it. For too many years, I'd been grateful for opportunities that I'd actually created through my own efforts and relationships. I'd accepted modest compensation for contributions that generated enormous value for others. I'd tolerated disrespect from people who fundamentally misunderstood the nature of what made businesses successful. Jackson's arrogance had been a gift even though it didn't feel like one at the time. By treating me as disposable, he'd forced me to discover that I was actually indispensable, just not to him. By eliminating my position, he'd created the opportunity for me to build something better on my own terms. The young MBA graduate sitting across from my desk interrupted my reflection. Kevin Park had contacted me about a junior consulting position, and his approach during our interview demonstrated exactly the kind of professional respect and genuine curiosity that Jackson had never shown. "Ms. Mason, I've researched your client success stories, and I'm really impressed by how you've maintained such strong relationships over the years. I'd love to learn your approach to building that kind of trust with business owners." Kevin's question showed that he understood what Jackson had never grasped. Experience wasn't an obstacle to innovation. It was the foundation that made innovation possible. Young professionals who respected accumulated knowledge and sought to build on it rather than replace it were the ones who would succeed in the long term. "Kevin, when can you start?" I asked with a smile. "Right now, if you'll have me." "Welcome to Mason Strategic Consulting. But remember this as you build your career. Experience isn't junk to be tossed aside when something newer comes along. It's treasure to be valued, respected, and enhanced with fresh perspectives and contemporary approaches." As Kevin shook my hand enthusiastically, I thought about the lesson I hoped he'd carry forward. Success comes not from eliminating what came before, but from building on foundations of trust, respect, and mutual value that make everyone stronger. Have you ever had a moment when someone underestimated you so completely that it actually became the catalyst for your greatest success? I'd love to hear your stories about turning professional setbacks into opportunities for growth and independence. Sometimes the people who dismiss our value are actually giving us the freedom to discover our true potential. If this story resonated with you, please like this video, subscribe to the channel for more stories about overcoming workplace challenges, and share it with anyone who might need a reminder that their experience and relationships have more value than they might realize. Thank you for listening, and I hope you find the courage to recognize your own worth and build the professional life you truly deserve.